There I am in all my glory. You'll notice I'm wearing glasses now. I'm getting to that age, having 25 years experience. I started out my career in specialist provision, working with moderate learning difficulties and moving into behaviour before most of my career in mainstream. I've been fortunate enough to work in a number of schools. I was deputy head in 2 of them in the UK and qualified as a head teacher back in 2006. I had a 2.5-year stint working in the local authority in the UK, where I was head of behaviour support service. But it's a great pleasure for me to be currently working and living in Hong Kong as part of the NIAS school there, and working alongside Kirsty. And I'll just let Kirsty introduce herself.
Sorry, Kirsty, your microphone is muted.
That's my bad. Mark, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, let me do. Oh, there you go.
There's me. My background is mostly in early years and Key Stage 1. I've worked in a variety of schools in Australia and in the UK and here in Hong Kong. I've worked lots with our youngest learners, children who are under 8 years old, and lots of experience supporting these little people in their communication skills, interactions, social skills, helping them to regulate their behaviour, which is going to feed nicely into what Mark's going to be talking about today. And yeah, my background is supporting lots with helping those children to feel successful, being a champion for them and helping them to integrate the best they can into the mainstream and trying to be really inclusive. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And just before Mark gets started, if everyone would be able to type into the chat box, if you wouldn't mind, what phase you normally work with. So if it's primary or secondary, or if we do have any early years fellows that have come through, that would be really great, because we are going to be using breakout rooms and we'd really like you to be put together with colleagues where you'll be able to discuss really well. So Margaret's going to be an absolute superstar behind the scenes sorting that out for us. So thank you. So away you go, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Kirsty. So there's 2 parts to this session. The first part is you're going to be listening and working with me, and that's supporting positive behaviour in our classroom. And then we'll take over and we'll be talking about creating those inclusive learning spaces. And you know, we don't want to talk at you. We want to encourage some collaboration and get you involved in today's training session. So there will be some collaboration and some breakout rooms, and there'll be a few takeaways as well, hopefully for you to consider and think about in the future. We would really appreciate your participation where we offer you to engage in it, and hopefully you'll get something out of today's session. So if I can start off with looking at behaviour, and I know we're focusing on our SEN pupils, but I firmly believe that at the sort of core of what we're trying to do, we need to look at how we support the individual with behaviour, and that isn't just the child, that's also our colleagues and the staff. So this little part of the session, I want to have a little look at what our perceptions are, what your current school practice might be. So we're going to just partake in a little SWOT analysis. Some of you may know what that means, some of you may not, but we'll find out in a moment. I want to look at promoting positive attitudes, and that isn't just positive attitudes of the students, obviously that's of the staff that work in your schools. And I'm going to share some examples of how, you know, I've supported and our school supports SEN pupils in regard to behaviour. And hopefully everyone involved will be invested in promoting that positive behaviour ethos. You'll understand some basic principles of behaviour management and have some ideas to support yourselves and colleagues, and ultimately you'll develop some ideas and some consistent approaches supporting your students in the classroom and around the school. So not much to do. Right, so a SWOT analysis, for those of you that perhaps haven't come across this acronym, what does it mean? Well, it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And it's understanding where we are now and beginning that process of positive change. And without, there's quite wordy slides coming up, but this is something that I just put together with colleagues over the years, where we considered the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats in a variety of different schools, whether they're special schools, whether they're mainstream schools, and also whether they're secondary or whether they're primary phases. And this doesn't relate to any particular school. This is just an overview, if you like, of some of the strengths. So, you know, you might have fantastic facilities and an environment. Your teachers will absolutely be fundamental in, you know, in terms of their experience and whether and how committed they are, and the fact that you know, they're kind and so on. Your students, you know, some of them will be gifted and talented, and hopefully that they'll want to learn and they're engaged in their education. And of course, you're going to be looking for positive relationships, good pupil-teacher ratios, parental support, and hopefully you've got all stakeholders you know, on board and a desire to do the best they can. So you're looking at weaknesses. You might have, you know, there might not be an effective policy in place, perhaps. You know, there might be differences between primary and secondary expectations. One of the things I often come across is an inconsistent approach to managing behaviors from teachers, lack of poor communication. Students don't know what the expectations are, or they even exploit the inconsistencies. Perhaps there's a lack of ownership. Teachers don't have their own classroom, perhaps, or there's a lack of respect from students for some reason. No clearly identified rewards or sanctions in place, too much negative focus, perhaps, you know, as a downward spiral, maybe. But there will be opportunities. Hopefully your school, your establishment will have a range of music, drama, sport, STEAM activities. There'll be different cultures to promote a variety of ideas and approaches. You've got that student input and ownership, for example, like school councils. And I could read through the list, and you're quite capable of doing that without me doing it. And then there's the threats. And again, you can see that there's any number of threats to being successful in creating this positive behavior approach. For example, there might be a lack of a SENCO in place. So you've got that lack of ownership and direction and leadership. It might be difficult to gather information about individual students and so on. So what I would like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is I'd like you to just take 3 or 4 minutes to reflect on your particular experience at the moment. I'm not going to ask anybody to share that with the group, but just as a reflective task, consider your own situation, whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're a head of year and responsible for your year group, or you have a middle leader or a senior leadership role and your whole school. And just take a moment to write down some initial thoughts using this SWOT analysis relating to managing behavior in your setting. So you might want to just create a grid like you can see on the screen and just quickly, you know, put down some strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And I've set aside about 4 or 5 minutes to do that. So I'll stop talking and I'll let you focus on that. If some of you are perhaps working in groups, it's a good opportunity to have a little chat with each other. And I'll come back in a couple of minutes. Okay. I probably haven't given you your full 5 minutes, but I'm conscious that this is something that, you know, will perhaps be something you'll want to focus on in more depth, perhaps with colleagues at a later date. But this was just one way of approaching the first step, if you like, in looking at how to change perhaps the ethos and develop that positive approach. And promoting positive behaviors, you know, raises some key questions. what does positive behavior mean? There's 49 of us in this room at the moment, and there's probably 49 different ideas or perspectives on what positive behavior means. And it will also vary, obviously, depending on the particular environment that you're working in and the particular time of day or the particular type of activity that you're doing. So that's something for you to also consider. What do you want to see? And I suppose if I was to give you, an alternative to what is, or an answer to what is positive behavior, I would sort of suggest that's the desirable behaviors that you would like to see exhibited by the children and the students at any particular given time, depending on what you're doing and where you are. Who does it apply to? Very, very often, we talk about behavior in school and we automatically or instinctively just sort of focus in on the students. It only applies to the students, but I would argue it actually applies to every single person in that building, including importantly, including the teachers and all the staff. And it's about expectations. What will the expectations be? And this is where I think that we need to have a consistent approach to delivering those behavior strategies and so on in our school. And who will implement this? Who has the responsibility for being the leader, if you like? Is it someone who's in the head of year role? Is it a Senko? Those kind of questions, those kind of people need to be the people that are going to take a lead in your school. But something just to sort of give you an idea to hang off, if you like. Something that I've developed with colleagues over the years is the 3 Bs. Very often what I found is that you can fall into the trap of making too many rules for your children and your staff to follow. And so we sort of came to the idea that we base our rules that we want on the 3 Bs. It's about being ready to learn. It's about being respectful to everybody in the classroom and in the wider school community. And it's about everybody feeling safe. And from those 3 Bs, we can hang off, our rules that we want to develop in the classroom or the wider school. So I got another little task for you to have a go at. What does it mean to you to be ready, to be respectful, and to be safe? If you want to share your ideas or your thoughts or some of the practices you already use, I'd like you to think about 2 or 3 examples for each of those headings where you would come up with a rule that is the most important to ensure good teaching and learning takes place in your class. So think about 1 or 2 rules for how children can be ready to learn, how they can show respect, and how you can ensure safety. So I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes just to have a think about that. And please, if you want to share anything in the chat, please do type it in. Thank you. I'm conscious of time and, I've got some more coming in. Be respectful and take care of the resources. Yeah, thank you. That's also absolutely spot on. Mentally prepared for the lesson, the right space to learn. Absolutely. Thank you, Tracy. Preparation. That's interesting. Be ready to speak English in class. Absolutely. Yeah, your classroom should be a safe space where people can share their thoughts and ideas. Thank you. Accepting differences, absolutely. Thank you to those people that are putting in their thoughts and ideas. And this is something, again, that perhaps you might want to take a little bit of time to think about, after this session. But I put down together just a couple of rules. We want the children to be able to work and play together cooperatively, and that would be them showing respect to each other. Again, under the respect, speaking politely and listening to others. We want them to be safe. So we talk about moving around the school building and the classroom safely and quietly. And we want them to use the facilities and the equipment appropriately, as some of you have already mentioned, and show respect to the peers and adults. So there's just an example, and there's on purpose, there's 5 rules there, because I think it's in my experience that if you have more than 5 rules, you're starting to lose the focus, and you can't really expect the children to sort of focus in on more than sort of 5 rules in your classroom. But you might have 2 from being safe, 2 from being respectful, and 1 from being ready, or however you want to see it, whatever your particular situation, warrants. In terms of staff behavior, I made mention earlier that we talk about behavior of children, but we also need to consider the behavior of the staff. We want to model the behavior we expect. And I talk about not walking by. Often we're going around our daily roles, and you're walking down the corridor, and you might see a child or a group of children who are up to something that you feel is not right or not appropriate. But it's very easy. We're all very busy. It might be that, well, I'll just turn a blind eye to that, and I'll carry on going where I'm going. I'm going to the photocopier, I'm going to the staff room. But really, we need that kind of ethos where everybody kind of, takes responsibility for every child in the school, even if you don't teach them. So that's what I mean by not walking by. It's about going over and challenging, that child or those children. What are you doing? Should you be doing this? Come on, let's think about, the expectations that we have. You need to understand, I think, and this is the difficult thing, you need to teach and reteach expected behaviors. There's a really interesting activity you can do yourselves. If you wear a watch, and I wear my watch on my left arm, if I put my watch onto my right arm, it'll take me about 30 days to instinctively look for the time on my right arm, because I'm so ingrained on the behavior to look to my left arm to see the time. And this is something that you will experience with children. You can put the rules in place, but you can absolutely expect that you're going to need to revisit those rules and reinforce those rules every day, throughout the year, but ultimately, hopefully, less and less. As teachers, we're going to follow through. So the poor behavior that you might, experience in your classroom is going to be dealt with you. You take ownership of it, and the student sees that you're the person, with that responsibility. It's not just passed on to somebody else sort of higher up the chain, if you like. That will also in turn help to actually build that relationship, between you and the student, and that level of trust and that level of positivity, where they can see that you care, and you want to give your time and your effort and your commitment to helping them to be better. But of course, we're not individual ships sailing through the night. Hopefully, we're going to be supported by our colleagues where appropriate. And ultimately, we're not thinking on our feet. There's going to be structured and planned rewards, systems, and consequences in place to help us be the best teachers that we can be. And we're going to focus as a staff and as an individual on and celebrate those positive behaviors of students. And we're going to play down the negative behaviors where we can. Okay, and it's very easy to get into that pattern of focusing in on the child that's constantly sort of, disrupting the class with, minor sort of interruptions and so on. Whereas we need to perhaps flip it around and praise the child that, engages appropriately in your lesson. We're going to use positive language. We're going to talk to students calmly, and maybe if they've made a poor choice, we're not going to bring it to the attention of everybody, but we're going to pop over to them in the classroom and quietly have a word with them, and always referring them back to the 3 B's about being respectful, about being ready, and about being safe, and bringing them on board. and recognizing that, every child is different and they will approach those rules that you put in place in a slightly different way. So we're going to go into a breakout task now, and I'm going to ask you to have a moment to share your ideas from the previous task where you were thinking about the 3 Bs. I'd like you to, somebody mute themselves there for me a moment, if you don't mind. Thank you. It's very easy, this little sort of this little joke here. Mrs. Munter liked to go over a few of the rules on the first day of school, and you can see this just sort of highlights my point about not having too many rules. There's about 30 rules there, and interestingly, every single one of them is really actually quite a negative slant. It's all no, 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 no. So in your breakout rooms, what I would like you to do, please, for a few minutes, maybe five to 7 minutes, I'd like you to have a chat with those of you in your group, and talk about what positive behaviors and what rules that you would like to agree upon as a group, and those that would reinforce the behaviors you want to see. So also decide perhaps on your setting. Are you going to do some rules for just a class? Are you going to do rules for a year group, or are you going to do rules for a whole school? Up to you. I'll leave it up to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ruth, and I was in a chat with a few lovely people. We're talking about the way you frame it. And I don't think necessarily it's about, of course, it's about the rules per se, but instead of framing it as a rule like that, Mrs. Mutner was obviously no, 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 no. So we're talking about keeping valuables at home. A lot of my students they might bring toys or something that's purely unnecessary to school. Instead of saying, don't bring it to school, leave it at home. You shouldn't bring it to school. I try to frame it as, it would be unfortunate if you lost it. So maybe it's a better idea just to keep it at home, or it looks very valuable, or who gave it to you? Oh, your grandma, then, it's something that you want to cherish. You should leave it at home. And I think that's a lot of the way you frame the rules doesn't necessarily make it seem like a rule, and especially it'll make the children understand where you're coming from, and they'll have a better understanding of what to do and what not to do, instead of just us telling them, like Mrs. Mutner, like, don't run. Instead, you would say, what happens if you run and you bumped into someone? Like, you would get hurt, and they would get hurt. So, better walk, or better just like stroll leisurely in the playground. So it's the way we frame the lesson we want to impart to the students.
Thank you so much, for your input, and I didn't pay you to say what you said, because it just feeds directly into my next slide, really. And I think you're right. It's about how you frame these rules, for want of a better word. But we want the children to understand why we need to perhaps not bring our favorite toys into school and so on, and why we don't want them to run around and things like that. So perhaps it is about, well, it's not perhaps, I firmly believe it's about engaging in the conversation with your students about why you make decisions, and it's about helping them to learn and be taught effectively and create that happy environment and keep them safe. And building on what you said, Ruth, about how you frame it. So, I mean, this is just, a very simple example that I've used, personally in the past. It's, we will try to. So, nobody is perfect. We can't, expect any of our students to follow those rules impeccably. They are human, and they are children, and that's why we love them. But we want them to try, perhaps, to work to the best of their ability. We want them to listen carefully to teachers and each other if they can. And we want them to be positive and use kind words. And we want them to use equipment appropriately. And of course, you would do lots of encouragement, how to show them how to use a ruler and how to use, other types of equipment that they will, have access to. And rather than saying, no running, it's about showing them why it's important to move safely and calmly around the class. And it's how you frame these rules is key in terms of encouraging and engaging the students to take part, really, and get on board. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry that I'm conscious of the time. Thank you to everyone who engaged and took part in those breakout rooms. And I just kind of coming to sort of the end of my section here, and wanted to give you some ideas to hang off and some points to discuss perhaps at a later time. One of the key ways of supporting the students is having a system of rewards and consequences. This helps to ensure that consistent approach across within your classroom, but across your year group and your whole school. And what we've used, this is actually from our current school. We have a house point system where it encourages individuals to gain house points. But the nice thing about it is it encourages them to work collectively as well. Because if they are part of Carnarvon House, who I happen to be head of Carnarvon House for the primary, we have assemblies where we take pride in the fact that we're part of Carnarvon House. And they know that if they get a house point, it benefits them as an individual, but it also benefits the other children that are in Carnarvon House. And we introduce some friendly kind of competition between Windsor and Sandringham and Balmoral. And there's a very large and impressive cup that they can win at the end of the academic year for the house that's won the most house points. But the system itself allows all the teachers and all the students, a system where they can collectively work together to make the school a nicer place. There are, of course, other widely available systems. Some of you may have heard of the Dojo app that's available freely to educators and to parents. And this is something that's been used in other schools that I've worked in. And it's a very easy and consistent way, again, to record and reward positive behavior. And the nice thing about the Dojo system is it links directly with, or it can link directly with parents. So their children can get a reward in the day. And if you have the app and the parent has the app, it actually notifies the parent that they've been rewarded. So that's something that if you haven't heard of Dojo before, you can look into. Also, student check-ins are vital, and understanding how our students are feeling is crucial. We know ourselves. Some days we wake up and it's going to be a good day, and some days we wake up and it's going to be a nightmare. And that's probably just the same for our children. And so understanding how they're arriving at school is quite fundamentally important, I think, certainly for our SEN children who perhaps can't easily understand their own feelings, perhaps, or the understand social cues, perhaps, or why things are the way they are. So it's about finding what's on their mind. Has there been anything that's happened that may have put them in a bad mood or unsettled them? And of course, getting to know our children and what struggles they may have. And one of the things that we use again in our school is zones of regulation. And we call them color monsters. And this is just a selection here that we've got. And they come in the morning, and they can put one of the monsters on their face or whatever you've got on the board, and it gives the teacher a very quick snapshot of how the class are feeling and how individuals are feeling. So hopefully you want everyone coming in with a nice, positive, happy, cheerful, smiley, jolly, and delighted feeling, and so they're all yellow. But you might get that one child that's come in and something's happened. Maybe a pet's died the day before, and they've come in and you've got their red monster, and it just allows you to sort of focus in on that child and at some point and just have a conversation with them, and perhaps head off any potential difficulties that they may have in that day. So that's been something that we use quite effectively with the younger children as well. And then this is a bit wordy, so apologies, but this is something for you if you, if you do find that you want to sort of like develop and promote this positive ethos in your school. It's about what rewards can you offer for those children that are exhibiting those desirable behaviors. And of course, it will reflect the age and interests of the children. You're going to want a different set of rewards for the secondary students as opposed to your primary. It's fairly obvious, but sometimes we just need to point those things out. And how will they get these rewards? They've got to be achievable. Are they going to have rewards on a daily basis, a weekly or a termly basis? And they must be applied consistently and fairly. And consider whether they're standalone rewards or they're massed over time. They've got to be valued. One of the things that sometimes I've seen happen is that you can actually undervalue or devalue the reward system in place if they are too easily achieved or they're too regularly given out. The children need to actually want to aspire to achieve these rewards. And of course, on the flip side of the rewards, it's also important to think about, when you need to put in place a consequence or a sanction for those children that have perhaps made a poor behavior choice. Again, they're going to be reflecting the age and understanding of the children, and this is particularly important with your SEN children, because their level of understanding may be different to what you might expect. And you should modify your consequences and sanctions accordingly. So we're just coming to the end of my stint now. One of the things that I just wanted to quickly share with you is that underpinning and supporting the behavior that you've got, the behavior policy and the behavior ethos in your school, when you're coming in focusing in on the children with SEN, you're going to want to have perhaps an individual education plan, and they come under various guises. And this is just an example of one that sort of I've put together, over the years. It's designed, with the child in mind specifically. And you can see it's got just 5 headings, things I find difficult. So that's the specific behavior perhaps that you want to address with that individual child. And then it's, how will that child show that they're achieving their targets? What do they need to do specifically? And who's going to help them? And when are they going to be helped? And then obviously at some point you're going to need to review that IEP. And that forms, a real important part of the process especially for our children with special educational needs. And this is an individual reward system as an idea as well, where you might, again, focusing on the positive. I want to see these positive behaviors from a particular child. You could do it in terms of, a timetable like this. And again, it's something that you create with the child. So when you're sat with Oren, for example, you might talk to them about what's their favorite cartoon character, or what do they like, stories do they like, and so you might come out that they like space adventures, so you've got a rocket and so on it. Obviously it's going to be different with older children and take on a different sort of approach, but the principles are the same in that the targets must be SMART. And for anyone who, another acronym for you, I try to avoid those where I can, but the SMART targets, they're specific, and they're very clear, and they're agreed with the child, they're agreed with the parents often, and also they're shared, so that's shared ownership, and everybody knows what the child's working towards and how they're going to be supported. They've got to be measurable, they've got to be achievable, and realistic, and they've got to be time sensitive. So your reward chart or your IEP might be reviewed, in a couple of weeks. It might be reviewed every 4 or 5 weeks. It might be reviewed every day, I suppose. That would probably not be realistic, but hopefully you get what I mean. So there's just a couple of ideas for you to use. And in summary, for my part, because I'm conscious I'm going over time and I'm taking into Kirsty's time here, it's about having clear expectations of your positive behavior for everybody, staff and children, so that they can begin to understand how their actions impact on themselves and others, and they can become more aware of themselves. And ultimately, that the goal is that your classrooms and your schools will be calmer, safer, and happier places for everybody. So thank you very much for listening to me. And I will, I think we've got a bit of a break now, haven't we, Kirsty? If people want to go and make a quick cup of tea or grab a biscuit, and Kirsty will lead on in a few minutes. So thank you very much, everybody.
Obviously really going hand in hand together with creating that positive climate for learning and creating a really good place where children are feeling safe, they're ready, and they know that they need to be respecting each other. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into looking at how to create an inclusive learning space. So let's think about it really practically. You've got all of that ideas in your head now, but actually, what is your classroom going to look like every single day to be really inclusive of not just children who have special education needs? Maybe there's some children who have English as additional language. Maybe there are children who have physical disabilities. Maybe they're just the mainstream children. When we're thinking about being inclusive, we want to make sure that we are really considering the whole child and their whole background, trying to stay away from that tokenistic view of our maybe preconceived conceptions of some children, and really getting to know them as individuals. So we're going to have a little look at this, and I've tried to be really conscious to make sure that I've got some examples here of things that are going to work for our primary colleagues and our secondary colleagues. I did see that there was a early years colleague as well, so hi, welcome. I'm one of you as well, so it's always nice to see our early years friends together. So when we're having a think about supporting children with SEN in the classroom, now one thing that is very apparent, that if you've been through teacher training, I know Mark and myself have, and many of our other colleagues have, but maybe you're a person who works with children in a tutor situation. Maybe you are not qualified just yet, and you are in your infancy of your education journey. But one thing is, during teacher training, is there is no specific way to teach children with SEN, because there's such a wide variety of the needs of children that you're better off having a repertoire of skills in your toolkit that you can pull out at different points. And I'm going to speak for myself and my experience being in the classroom for a very long time, that it's going to work some days really, really well, and other days it's going to not work and it's going to be really difficult. And that is okay. It's all about you really getting to know those children in your class. What things do they like? What things do they not like? What are their triggers? How are you going to interact with them? And what kind of information can you pull from families? Can you pull from their previous teachers? We want to think about the team around that child and making sure that we're being a champion for that little person. So this is just a quote that I've pulled out. This has come from the Department of Education in the UK. This has come from their Supporting SEN document, which Margaret's really kindly going to send along to you. It's over 100 pages, so you're probably not going to want to read it like cover to cover, but there's lots of really good things that you can pull out from here. But it's suggested that you want to have that repertoire of strategies nestled within your own philosophy, within your own pedagogy, that you can pull out when you need to, like I mentioned. You want to think about the characteristics. You want to think about your background knowledge. You really, really want to build that positive relationship with those children, exactly like what Mark was talking about at the beginning. It all starts with building that relationship regardless of need. So I want you to have a think about, on just a piece of paper with you now. 5 minutes might be a bit long. I might just give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes. That on a piece of paper, draw your classroom, be a bird's eye view. Where do the tables where are the tables? Are they in groups? Are they in rows? Where are your resources? Do you have your pencils and your rulers and your rubbers in a pot on the middle of the table? Or do the children carry them in their own pack? Or if you're in secondary, children potentially would have a little pencil case, or maybe secondary children do everything on devices now. When you're thinking about presenting the learning to the pupils, how is it being presented to them? Are you having a little think about the font that you're using? And there's all these things that you really, really think about. In your class, do you have a seating plan? Or do the children just come in and they can sit wherever they want? And then the last one there is the colors. Colors are very, very, they can have a big impact on how the children interact with that learning space. So I'm just going to give you a few moments. If you want to just doodle down, if you don't have a classroom, or if you don't work with children in a classroom, think about the learning space you might be with, or if that's something that you're aspiring to, what would your classroom look like? And this is something that right at the beginning of my teaching career, I would do a lot. I would sit there and I love moving rooms around and having a really good think about it, because your learning space is your third teacher. And that's the thing that comes from the Reggio Emilio approach for early years, that you want the space that you are creating for these children to teach them what to do without you being there. And that's something that I know I've really used within all of my practice with younger children and with older children. You want to really have a clear space that's designed for them. So I'll just give you a few moments. We are going to come back to this. So if you don't get it finished, or if you want to have some more time to think about it, we will come back to this. So I'll just give you maybe 1 or 2 minutes more to have a look at how you're going to do it. Okay. I'm a very visual learner, so I like having pictures, but maybe you've made notes down your page. However you want to present this is obviously completely fine, just personal to you. So when you're thinking about a creative, inclusive classroom, we want to really be explicit with what we are doing. So once again, from the Department for Education, they say that an environment in which students feel emotionally safe, in which there are clear rules, so that comes back to Mark's creating climates for positive behaviors. They want to have predictable consequences. Children, not just children with learning needs, all children love routine. They love knowing what's going to happen, and it really helps them to regulate their emotions and to stay calm and to stay in a good zone where they're ready for learning. If they're feeling safe and secure, it's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Once you're in that safe zone, you are going to be ready to take in that information. If a child is coming into a classroom, into a space where they don't know what's expected next, if things are changing all the time, they're going to have potentially a level of heightened anxiety, and you are maybe, well, not maybe, I'm going to say you're probably going to really struggle to teach that little person if their mind is somewhere else. By creating something that's very predictable, by doing things over and over again in repetition, using the same language, using the same symbols for things, that's really going to help them to feel really safe and secure. And they're going to know what happens next. And when thinking back to creating the rules in your class, being consistent, making sure that if you want them to have their equipment ready and they don't have their equipment ready, what's the consequence for that going to be? And each time you do that, you are teaching them that cause and effect. This is what's going to happen. And especially our SEN children, they really need that. They have to do things repetitively to help them to learn. But I do think that is for all children. So, and then at the end here, it says it's positive goals. It's good for those with and without SEN. So SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, is the D there. So that's one thing Mark and I, when we were thinking about this, is we were thinking about that quality first teaching. And I know that's something that if you've taught in the UK, that they talk about a lot. is all children, regardless of need, they expect and they should be in a place where they're having really, really high quality interactions with their teachers. They're being exposed to high quality lessons that have been planned and catered for, regardless of if they have needs. So that's really, really important. So just to give you a bit further background, using the Education Endowment Foundation. So we're thinking about looking at this here as a fantastic resource if you are ever wanting to find some further information for educational research. You're looking at what are the current trends in education. You want to know a little bit more. So if you're ever talking with colleagues, or if you wanted to, if using your SWOT analysis where you've done with Mark, you want to find out some further information, what's going on in other schools around the world, this is a really great resource website that I would highly recommend that you would use. So today we're going to be looking at the recommendations for supporting SEN in a mainstream class, which I think is where most of us are working at, that we're potentially not coming from those schools where it's a specialized SEN unit. We're all teaching in the mainstream. We have a wide variety of children. So this report came out with 5 main recommendations, and I'm just going to do a bit of a deeper dive into the first recommendation. Once again, at the end of this, Margaret is going to supply you with a link, and you'll be able to have a look at this in its entirety. And it's a really good, easy document to digest and have a look at. And they also have case studies in there, so you can reflect on your own practice and what's happening in your setting. So we're going to have a look at recommendation 1, to create positive and supportive environment for all pupils without expectation. And I think that last part is really, really important. That, and I know I sound like a parrot rabbiting on, but I really, really want to hit home with all children require this, and all children should have this. So without expectation of need, background, culture, language, anything, this is what is going to be have a huge impact on your teaching practice and your interactions with children. So we want to think about being explicitly inclusive. So we wanted to make sure that it's at the forefront of everything that we do. Now, this little quote at the top has come from the UK SEN Code of Practice, and it's that every teacher is a teacher of children with special educational needs. So we are all teachers of SEN. We are all teachers of EAL. So if you keep that in the forefront of your mind, when you are planning lessons, you're thinking about not just what is the outcome, but how are the children in my class going to access this information? How are the children in my class going to be successful sharing their understanding with either myself or with their peers? How am I going to create an environment where they will be successful regardless of need as well? So it's effective teachers of pupils with SEN are focused on learning more about the individuals they teach and maximizing the effectiveness of their teaching. So one thing I know working with teachers is sometimes, and especially with parents, is sometimes parents are very worried about their child being labeled. And that's one thing, working in the learning support team with my colleagues, obviously I know there is a stigma around children having a label if they have special educational needs, but the label, it does 2 things. It really helps us to get to know that little person more and how they learn and how they see the world and what we need to do to support them in their next steps. We also want to find out more about where have they started from? What has been their background before they have got to me? So children who have SEND, they might not be making progress as quickly as their peers, but they are still making progress from their starting point. And that's what we really want to focus on. Sorry, we've got someone on the chat and I'm gonna, oh, yes. Yes, thank you. Some children, yes, they are not recognized, professionally diagnosed. Yes, I completely agree. Thank you so much for adding that in. I find that is definitely in different cultures, that stigma around children with SEN, but you as a teacher and you as an educator, you will get to know those pupils. And I'm happy to provide any links to anything that will help you. But that's where we want to really look at quality first teaching and making sure that we have a really high, consistent approach that's going to be inclusive for everybody. So once you know that all of those children have had a really high level, any children then that potentially are still struggling, you can give a more targeted approach. And that would be something that you at your school would have to definitely speak to if you have a special education needs coordinator, if you have a line manager, if you have a member of your senior leadership team, they would really be the best people to help you on that journey there. That's why Mark and myself are really keeping to that more of a blanketed approach where you're considering all children. Once then you're seeing children that are still having difficulty, that's when you would go to your level 2 and you would think about, right, what sort of interventions do I need to put in for these children? So when we're thinking about being inclusive, we want to think about how can we maximize the access to high quality teaching experience for all pupils, especially those with SEN. So I want you to do 2 things. I would like you to think about this, but I also would like you to type it into the chat. Now, the chat seems to be the best way for everyone to interact today, which I'm loving. So the more that you can add in, the better. So we're going to think about a seating plan. So if you're in your class, having a seating plan is really, really going to be maximize your children, helping them to feel really safe and secure when they're coming in. But what things would you consider when you are creating your seating plan? If you would like to just add into the chat any of your thoughts. Once again, there is no wrong answers here. Just please share what you feel comfortable sharing. And I know a seating plan for some people might be something that you might not have considered before, but even working with children who are 3 years old, I work with children in our nursery, having a seating plan, they have their own little bubbles on the carpet. So every time they come to the carpet, they just come and find their little animal and they sit down. And it makes your transitions really quick, and you're able to just get straight into your lesson. For children who are in primary, you might have them, oh yes, struggle visually, they need to be closer to the front. Perfect. Friendships in class. Yes, I think that sometimes putting children with their best friend is not going to be the best thing for their learning. Actually, by putting them with someone that they don't know as well is going to help them to stay focused. It's going to help them develop a new friendship. Yes, perfect. They need to sit closer to the front. They need to be engaged with the teacher. Yes, that's great. Yes, Mark put a mixed ability in groups. Perfect. Leaving our space between desks. Yes, that is definitely, oh, wonderful. Everyone's coming onto the chat now. Yes, randomizing a seat chart. Yes, and I think that is really, really excellent. And I've spoken to one of our secondary colleagues about that some of the secondary colleagues, and this is not something I've really done with the younger ones, but I would have them with the seating chart on the carpet when they come and sit down when they're listening on the board. But then I would also have a seating plan for where they sit at the tables. I hadn't really considered that when they potentially work in groups, they would have a different seating plan. So once again, you're being really, really flexible there. Yes, higher ability children, more capable children, working with children who might need more support. Yes, giving our children with SEN a buddy. That is excellent. Thank you so much. This is all really, really great. And I think especially pairing a child that some research actually suggests that children who require support, who are typically more of your lower ability children, they actually work better with your children who are your middle, kind of more expected, because that level of difference cognitively isn't so great. So they're able to actually converse at more of a shared understanding level. And then your higher ability children, they can kind of oversee and work. They can then also support your middle children with boosting them up. So that's something to think about if you were ever thinking about a seating chart or mixed ability partners. Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. Now, this one's a bit different. How would you be inclusive at break time? Because all of our children, they are not just with us in the classroom, they are also outside during break time. think about those children who might find break time really, really challenging. How could you be inclusive? What sorts of things might you want to consider when you are thinking about those children when they are accessing break time? Setting up quiet areas, perfect. I'm just going to turn on the light behind me because I'm in complete darkness. There we go, that's better. Now you can see me, sorry. Provide activities, yeah, that's great. Yeah, support a buddy system again. Yes, this is all really great because inclusivity doesn't just stop once they walk out the door. We need to think about the whole day. Where are these children? What experience are these children having? And is it positive for them? Excellent. Another thing at break time might be that you can set up different sorts of clubs that could be happening at break times. You might have a chess club going on, or maybe your school offers some after school activities, but things that you could set up at lunchtime as well. Yes, I think setting up a system and an area for children who are finding things difficult, where can they go? What's going to be their next step here? And I think that really feeds back into what Mark was talking about with the individual education plan, that if children are finding lunchtime difficult, their behavior is telling you. A teacher once said to me, and a teacher loves a soundbite, that if a child could, they would. And if they can't, they won't. So if a child can play nicely with their friends, they will. But if they can't, they won't do it. So when you're really thinking about supporting them, going beyond the classroom, thank you so much for sharing. If anyone wants to add anything else in, you keep going, but I'm sorry, going to move on. So this is just a really, really lovely quote. And this was from a teacher. It's on the Education Endowment document, but she says that creating an inclusive environment is the most important thing a school can do. And I completely agree. An inclusive culture is a prerequisite for an effective school. It brings happiness, a feeling of safety, and being part of the community. And of course, it impacts positively on learning, both in the classroom and beyond. It is our job to prepare pupils to flourish and feel truly included in society. And I think that is a really lovely thought to kind of keep in your mind, that we work in these schools, especially here in Hong Kong. They are so diverse. They are so culturally different. We've got children from all over the world together, and they come together in this lovely microcosm of a place, but they also have to go out into the real world one day. And we have to be really conscious of that. So making sure that being inclusive is at the forefront of everything you do. Children understand that children are different and that people are different and people are going to need different things. And just because someone else gets more doesn't mean that you get less. We just want there to be equality, and we want people to all be at that same level. So I think it's really nice thinking about that. So when you're thinking about your inclusive classroom, I'm going to be providing you at the end 2 documents that you can take away and you can self-audit and have a really, really good look at your learning space in your own time, and you can reflect and you can make changes. The document from the Communication Trust is for our colleagues that are working in lower primary and maybe in early years. And it's amazing. I've used it many times. You can go through and you can audit yourself. You can ask one of your colleagues to audit you as well. And it gives you a really great step-by-step for things that you might want to think about in your classroom, especially promoting high quality communication, which is super important for our children with SEN, our children who have English as an additional language. The speech and language UK resource is also primary, but they also have a really, really comprehensive checklist for secondary. So I'll provide you with those both at the end. Margaret kindly is going to forward them along to you. But there's many, many things to have to think about, but we're going to do very quickly, I'm very conscious of the time as well, a deeper dive into inclusive classrooms. We're going to look at high quality visuals, the classroom learning space, how it's being organized. And the third one is consistency across teachers and staff, which feeds really nicely into what Mark was talking about with positive behaviors. So when we're looking at high quality visuals, and you might have noticed that I keep using these little boxes with a picture and a word in the corner. This is a system called a widget. And once again, at the end, I'm going to provide you with the link to that that you can access that. So widgets are amazing. It's a website, you can type in a word and a picture comes up. And if the picture that you want, a picture that comes up, doesn't match the word, you can go onto the internet and add in another picture. Now, to use widget is a paid thing. Obviously, we are not affiliated with that. But if you are going to have a budget and you would like someone to spend something, try and get them to get it, because it's really, really good and it saves you so much time. But before I got widget, I would just go onto the internet and I would try to find pictures that would really link with what the children were learning, especially for the key vocabulary that I really want them to know. So if it was something on the lines of, if we were learning about the water cycle, obviously they need to know water, they need to know precipitation, they need to know cloud, they need to know rain. Those keywords, I would get those keywords and I would make sure that those words would have a high quality visual. So I'm not going to read it out to you because you're more capable of reading. So that's what I've pulled these two statements from the primary and secondary, from the checklist from the Speech and Language UK. So high quality visuals, if you're going to make a change tomorrow or over the next few days, have a real big think about how can you incorporate more visuals into your learning. I'll put my hand up. I cannot speak Chinese to save myself. I'm from Australia. I don't speak any other languages. But when I go out to eat at a Chinese restaurant, if it has the little pictures, thank goodness, because that's really, really helping me. It's the same for our children in class. If they have a picture, they are going to be able to make that link regardless of what language they speak, regardless of if they have SEN. So using visuals is really, really important. You can also use gestures with your hands. So one thing that I do in my class when I want the children to speak together, non-verbal cue, is I just put my hands just like this, and then they know that they need to move. So there's things that you can try out with your class. Here's just some examples of some high quality visuals that we have in our school. So in maths, presenting the information, not just in numbers. How can they be shown the amount using different ways? So they've got thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones. That's also on a display board at the back of the class. The children have access to those resources in the room for when they're manipulating. This here is something that is used at the front of the class. These are my 4 expectations for when I'm working with children. This is when they're showing the active listening. So I want their ears listening, I want good sitting, eyes looking, quiet mouth. Those 4 things. If they're doing those 4 things, we're going to be able to get on with our learning. Very short, very clear at the front, always displayed. This here, sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy, but this is a visual timetable. And this teacher has gone on to a website and they've just got pictures and they've made it themselves of each of the lessons. That's displayed in the classroom. And this is something that at our school at North Anglia in the primary and also over in our early years, that every single teacher has this up in their classroom, either as a visual, if you've got younger children, visual text, or with your older children, the text. But they probably would have had the visual at the beginning of the year and they maybe have taken that away. So that's something that's really, really important. Help them to feel really settled, to know what's happening throughout the day. And then this is just a really quick one of the school values that we have. So we want everyone to be happy and safe. That's at the top. And then we've got our 7 key values there presented to the children. So that's just visuals. The second one is your classroom organization. Where are the things in your classroom? How are the children accessing equipment? Are the desks, like I said before, are they in rows? Are they in groups? Are the resources out available for them? Do you have things labeled? Is a child easily able to find out what they want? That's for our primary children. For secondary, have you thought about color coding their timetable for their classroom? If they have to go to an English lesson, a math lesson, an art lesson, then a Chinese lesson, on their timetable, could those things be color coded and then a color put onto the door of that room so they're able to move themselves around the school more independently? So once again, very quick, sorry, I'm very conscious of time. This here is a color coding system that's been used in a book for a child to help them with finding the key features in this piece of writing. And that's something that was used right across this year group. And the children were really able to access that independently. Now, some children were not given this because they didn't need that as a scaffold. But many children were given this, and slowly over time, that scaffold hopefully would be taken away and they'd be able to access that work more independently. This is another teacher, has all of their resources labeled, everything's there, all the children are able to come and get whatever they want. And then this is here from one of our year one classrooms, sorry to our secondary colleagues, but this is just a cabinet and they can come and get what they want. Everything's labeled. These children are 5. When they pack away, it happens so quickly because they just go match the picture, find it, put it away. Obviously, it takes a bit of training, but you will reap the benefits at the end of the year, I promise. And the last one we're going to have to talk about quickly is consistency across teachers and staff. So for all phases, that it's really important that if you are using visuals, if you are using gestures, if you are using different thoughts of things around the school, that all of the members of staff are on the same page here. Because if one teacher is choosing to use hand signals all the time and they're doing their stops or they're moving, and then a child's coming into another lesson and they don't know what's going on, it's going to be really, really confusing for them. And the same as well with the behavior system. If one teacher is using house points, one teacher is using dojos, someone else is using a marble jar, someone else is using something different, it can become very, very confusing. And then children just don't know what's going on. And when they don't know what's going on, that's when their emotions start to go. And that's when obviously the focus is gone for them. So really thinking about trying to be as consistent, if it's across a year group, if it's across a department, if you're working with an English department or a Chinese department, thinking about talking about that together, making sure that you and your colleagues have had a really good conversation around that. So symbols that are common amongst our school is for our global goals. We use this right across early years, primary and secondary. That is consistent. The way that work is presented in books is also consistent across year groups. That depending on age group, some children write their own date. The younger ones, they have it for them. They have their learning objective. And then this class, this year group here, they've presented the success criteria visually. So that is something that's in every single book for every single child in this year group. The teachers have decided that together. They've also know then what is expected for each child. So any person picking up that book or any teacher working with those children knows immediately what they need to see in this child's piece of writing for that child to have met that learning objective. And then as well, thinking about how your classrooms are set up. So one thing that we do not have at Nord Anglia is how the desks need to be. Teachers are allowed to have them in rows if they would like. They're allowed to have them in little groups if they would like. That depends on the teacher. But what is consistent is that as a specialist teacher, if you are a Chinese teacher coming into this room, that Chinese teacher has their own seating plan. The children coming into that room know exactly where they need to sit every single time. That is consistent. Each of the teachers in that department have decided that they are going to use seating plans. So regardless of where they are working within each classroom, those children know that they're going to be expected to sit in a particular space. So that's something that's really important. Okay, so I'm not sure how much time you're going to have. Oh, we're right at 6 o'clock, so maybe we might not have time, but I will send you the link for this. And this is something that you can be able to do. I've made lots of copies of this so you can have a go at it. But it was using a Jamboard to then think about your original design of your classroom and then think about, well, now think about high quality visuals, the organization, thinking about being consistent, thinking about inclusion. What would it look like now? How would your classroom potentially change? And maybe this is something that you can take away and do. Maybe you would like to do it with another colleague together tomorrow at work, or maybe you want to do it with your department. Having a think about, is the way that my room, when I walk in, I know obviously it's tricky if you don't have your own room, but what sort of things can I adapt or what sort of things can I tweak to make it more inclusive? One thing that I've always done, and someone told me years ago, is sit on the floor in your classroom or go and sit at one of the desks in your room. What is that child seeing? What experience are they having? Pretend you are that child. That's really going to help you think and think a bit deeper about the experience that that child is having. Sorry, we've got a bit of feedback. So yeah, questions.